Great. My name is Nina Weithorn. It's an honor to be here, and I'm really excited to share my project with you. So my project is called the Allensworth Agricultural Experiment Station. It is a 4,000 square foot site in Allensworth, California that investigates holistic and community-based techniques for food producing landscapes with a focus on promoting ecological health, repurposing materials in the organic waste stream, increasing food sovereignty in the community of Allensworth, and reigniting its radical agrarian history. So Allensworth is an unincorporated community in Tulare County. It was established in 1908 and was the first town in California to be founded, financed, and governed by Black Americans. One of the primary purposes of its establishment was to insulate Black residents from the systemic racism of Jim Crow era laws. And for several years in the early 20th century, it really thrived as a space for Black agrarianism. Agriculture was the main economy, and many of the residents had subsistence gardens where they grew their own food. It's now an official California state park, and it's home to about 600 residents. So the cultivation of food within a system of oppression and really in spite of it was one of the defining characteristics of Allensworth. But this practice really has much deeper roots that go back to the institution of slavery and plantation landscapes. So for hundreds of years, millions of enslaved Africans were forcibly brought to the Americas, and along with them were African crops. Once on plantations, many enslaved people had subsistence gardens where they would cultivate these crops in order to meet their nutritional needs, often in secret. So there's really no doubt that this history of resilience inspired the establishment of Allensworth. And so I really just want to ground the project in that. So about 15 years after slavery was abolished and many emancipated Black Americans were working as sharecroppers or tenant farmers, Booker T. Washington founded Tuskegee University in Macon County, Alabama. And Tuskegee provided vocational training specifically for Black Americans with a focus on agriculture. George Washington Carver, who was a Black agronomist, became the head of the agricultural department and established the Tuskegee Agricultural Experiment Station, which was a 10-acre farm dedicated to experimenting with sustainable farming techniques. He published a lot of his findings in 43 agricultural bulletins. So when Allensworth was founded in 1908, the Allensworth Progressive Association, which was the governing body of the town at the time, wanted Allensworth to be the Tuskegee of the West, or another Black agricultural hub. And while Allensworth thrived for several years in the early 20th century, a lack of access to water and economic opportunities eventually led to the partial dissolution of the town. But in 2022, Allensworth received $40 million from the state to build a community center and a regenerative farm to honor the town's agrarian history and provide food for the community. So that's really where my project comes in. I've been working with the Allensworth Progressive Association to begin the process of developing this farm and testing out different methods of food production. So the first step for me in that process was really understanding the landscape. Allensworth is in the territory of the Southern Valley Yokuts and was historically inhabited by the Wolwol tribe. It lies at the intersection of 3 different historic plant communities, including alkali desert scrub, wetland, and grassland. The development of industrial agriculture in the late 19th century led to the use of destructive practices like tillage, the use of agricultural chemicals, and these practices have led to the overall degradation of the ecosystem and soils. And these practices are really becoming increasingly unsustainable and unrealistic for the Central Valley, and a new framework for food production is really desperately needed. So, in an attempt to contribute to this new framework for agriculture, I've been working with the APA, which is now the nonprofit in the town of Allensworth, to develop the Allensworth Agricultural Experiment Station. Many of the APA members are shown here below. And the experiment station is really inspired by George Washington Carver's experiment station at Tuskegee, and is really a space to test out alternative food production and soil building methods that take into account the history of the landscape and also its current conditions. So the Allensworth Agricultural Experiment Station is located on 4,000 square feet of land on the APA's community center lot. It's right in the center of town across from the elementary school, so it's highly visible and accessible to the community. And a really key part of this project is that with the funding from the state, the APA plans to eventually purchase a larger parcel of land in Allensworth to establish an educational community farm. So the experiment station basically serves as a test site to determine the most effective methods for revitalizing the soil and making it viable for food production, with the idea that these methods can be scaled to a larger site in the future. So I did a really detailed site analysis. I took soil samples and documented all of the existing site vegetation on the community center lot, and found that the soil was extremely degraded and not in a state where it is capable of producing food. So as a first step to determine how to remediate the existing land, I compiled different agroecological methods of soil building, water harvesting, and planting that could be used to make the land viable for food production. These methods utilize a variety of materials, including biochar, cardboard, compost, food scraps, logs, manure, straw, weeds, and wood chips. So many of the materials utilized in these methods are widely available in the region around Allensworth as agricultural byproducts. So in this material mapping and sourcing exercise, I really wanted to stay roughly within an 100-mile radius of Allensworth in order to begin to form a hyperlocal material network. And I also wanted to, wherever possible, disrupt the organic waste stream and capture organic materials that would otherwise be discarded and reincorporate them into the landscape at the experiment station in order to build soil. So we were able to find wood chips from local orchard removal, manure from local dairy operations, food scraps from the community, and so on. And so how do all these methods and materials get configured on site? I'm going to go through this pretty quickly just for the sake of time, but if anyone else is also a big soil remediation and compost nerd like myself, I'm happy to talk about these methods in greater detail later at any point. But the first three methods in experiment areas A, B, and C all involve the layering of materials, allowing them to decompose in place and basically build a new nutrient-rich layer of soil. So the first is hugelkultur. This is basically making a mound out of logs and compost and plant debris and other materials, allowing those materials to decompose in place. And then as the wood breaks down, it releases water, providing the plants planted on the surface with a constant water and nutrient source. Experiment area B consists of compost pits. This basically involves digging a trench, backfilling it with food scraps and wood chips, allowing those materials to decompose, and then the plants can be, or the pits can be planted directly into. And then experiment area C is sheet mulching. I like to think of this as making a giant earth lasagna. You start with cardboard and you layer other organic materials on top, and again, allow it to decompose, planting the surface with a cover crop, and you have a rich new layer of soil on top of the existing degraded soil. And while the other experiment areas really focus on remediating the existing soil, the native planting area is really focused on what can grow in the existing soil conditions. It's really an exercise in habitat restoration and bringing back endemic plant and wildlife species to the area to see what can thrive. And lastly, a compost system for processing the organic food waste from the community into a nutrient-rich soil amendment. So this is an idea of what the experiment station could look like after about a year of growth. And the exciting part about this project is that over the last 5 months, with the help of the APA and other community members and volunteers, we were able to start building all of these different experiment areas. So this was the construction of the hugelkultur. We were able to get logs from local orchard removal. We were also able to make 10 different compost pits using food scraps from the community. We were also able to source cardboard and compost and plant debris and begin the sheet mulching area. And lastly, during a volunteer day, we were able to plant over 50 native plants, 19 different species, with the help of some local community members. During the same day, we also had a compost workshop where we built a 3-bin compost system, and the community learned how to process their food scraps into compost. This is the evolution of the site from March all the way through May. You can see the experiment station coming to life. And this is about a month ago, the end of July. It's very hot in Allensworth right now. It's been about 110 degrees every day, but we hooked up some irrigation and the cover crops and native plants are doing really well. So to wrap up, how does this expand to the community? What is the larger vision? In an effort to think about future crop cultivation and what can be grown in this remediated soil, I've done a mapping exercise looking at what the community is already growing to see what they value. And I was also able to visit the amazing garden of Maria and Julio Rodriguez, who are residents of Allensworth and are already employing a lot of these agroecological techniques. The APA has also frequently spoken about cultivating Afro-Indigenous crops to honor Allensworth's Black agrarian history and also provide food for the community. So these are some of the crops that we will most likely be growing at the experiment station and also on the larger farm space in the future. So overall, the experiment station is really a first step in beginning to form the connection between local organic materials, soil building, food sovereignty for the community, ecological restoration, and education and community building. It's really my hope that this is a space for trial and error and for data collection, but also for the formation of relationships between local material providers and Allensworth, between Allensworth and the local community, and really acts as a space to reignite this radical agrarian history. As the site evolves, I plan to develop and publish an agroecological landscape design toolkit that's really inspired by George Washington Carver's Bulletins that I mentioned earlier. And it'll really be a place-based guide to transforming degraded landscapes into vibrant food-producing ones. So thank you so much. And that is my project.